welcome all to our first webinar of eKutumb. I feel very proud of this moment that either we had the opportunity to defer this, but we never could get a very foreseeable situation of when the pandemic is going to be over. So we thought that we'll use the alternate medium. And I think it's been a blessing in disguise that because we are doing it in this manner, so we could have people connecting us from all over, which otherwise we would have had to request Prashant to fly over to this place, and which may or may not have happened. So I think virtual world does have its big advantages as well. So I welcome you all on this our fifth Kutumb, and while we were conceiving this, and while we were thinking about that, how exactly we should go about this. And I think this pandemic has really, actually, I would say, raised more focus on the subject which we've been talking for the last 2.5 years. And I think there's a sense of realization of the impact of what I would say nature can do to you, or nature is doing to you. So I think this is a moment where this has got surfaced. And I'm sure as we see this pandemic going on, I'm sure people parallelly have also started realizing the impact of climate change in a very different light. It was never felt that it could really happen to you or will happen to you, and what could be its impact. And then this pandemic has made us all realize that it can just be beyond you if you don't really put yourself in order. And I think every tragedy or mishap has a huge learning, and it has its own I would say offshoots of positivities. And I think one of the big positivities I see is definitely the focus towards climate change. And in a country like ours, we are I would say a country in the making. We are still half a country, I would say, in terms of especially of building construction. So half the country is yet to be built. So, and if that is going to happen, if we don't sense it now, when is it that we're going to sense this need of this climate change and impact of it? And within this, IIFL Home Loans is a housing finance player, and we have felt that it's our moral responsibility to all our stakeholders as well, and maybe an investment for the future to trigger a spark which could become a fire tomorrow. And so we thought that we should aptly name this as Building Sustainable, Affordable Homes Amid this Pandemic. So we thought this is going to be the title of our this first webinar, which we are doing. And the context of this webinar, it comprises of 2 webinars and 2 podcasts. So we've got together different set of people in different sections. Today's section is you will hear from, I would say from the best of experts you can, nationally or globally, I would say, to the context of the subject. That is the first webinar which we are doing. The second webinar, which would happen somewhere in first week of September, would be talking about more at a policy and the financial ecosystem which is required to fuel this thing, because no good endeavor is complete unless you have a financial ecosystem dovetailing with it. And in between, we have 2 podcasts, again from experts covering 2 sets of it. One is the generic on the certification and on the process of how do you get these things certified, and some experiences of developers who've actually done something on similar lines. So I welcome you all, and I welcome both the guests as well. And so maybe have the AV now, please. And now I would like to introduce someone whom I first heard in Pune. And I was extremely fortunate that I attended that seminar. And someone with such energy and passion, he was talking on the subject, and I could see it all over. And just for your information, both of you, I'm also an architect, although in the finance world, that I understand the amount of passion we all of us have, people who belong to this profession. So I would like to introduce Prashant Kapoor. He's the Chief Industry Specialist for Green Buildings and Cities with IFC, which is the World Bank Group enterprise. And till some time back, he was based out of Washington. Now he's moved base to Singapore, as he just mentioned about to us in the informal chat. And primarily that is more to focus on this region, on the subject he's been talking about, and he's been doing work on. So he studied architecture from India and energy efficient buildings from Oxford Brookes University, UK. And he's an internationally well-known thought leader and expert in bioclimatic design. And he's been the creator of EDGE, which is an acronym for Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies. I think this is such a breakthrough certification because he has simplified the whole journey for the entire community, especially to the affordable segment and the lower strata, where it was a very complex thing to accomplish the certification, and he's made it so simple. And I'm sure people who are going to walk through his presentation and the site which is there, it is so easy to do, easy to infer. I think in today's time, the complexities have to be transformed to simplicities if you want to have a widespread reach of anything or any concept. So I think he's truly achieved that. And currently, this is in over 20 markets they plan to have in the next 7 years. The goal is for green buildings to reach a 20% market share, which is equivalent to 1 million cars off the road and over $300 billion in the green investment. So he's been associated across the world, and he's been expert with people, I'm sure, travel a distance to listen to him. And I'm sure he would be of a valuable input to us. And thank you so much, Prashant, for accepting to be on this webinar. And hopefully, I'm sure the audience would also enjoy the passion and the subject on which you have devised EDGE. And over to you, Prashant. Thank you so much.
Hello, thanks Monu, for your kind introduction, and I hope you can hear me clearly and see my screen. Could you give me a thumbs up if you can?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay, great. Wonderful to be here. It's really, I mean, it's really good for three reasons actually. One is it's lovely to be talking to people in my home country, and I've just arrived to Asia, so it's really nice to be talking to people in India. Also, I really respect what IIFL and Monu are doing through eKutumb. It's really wonderful to see a financial agency really trying hard to scale up green buildings, which we think is the right thing, for the sector and for the market leadership there, to really validate what we have also been trying to do, and we want to see more of such action in terms of scale up. So that's wonderful to see. And third reason, it's really good to join Ashok Ji on the podium again. So it's nice to connect and share our thoughts in this platform. So what I shall do is try to kind of keep it a little bit away from the Indian examples. I'm sure you've had enough and seen enough, but I'll try to keep it sort of interesting from a global perspective. What is happening around the world in this space? Particularly with housing, I've tried to stay true to that space. Try to stay as true to affordable housing as well across the world. So that's my endeavor. So I shall start with just quickly explaining for those who may not know IFC. You must know World Bank generally, but IFC is the private sector investment arm of the World Bank. We're the largest solely focused private sector development bank, really. And the bit of the World Bank that you do know is the IPRD that funds governments. Our role is to do the same thing, but working through private sector. By private sector, we mean working with developers, working with municipalities, or even working with financial institutions like that. That's how we are looking to scale this up. And we have a lot of investments in India, as you may know already, in this space, and a lot of it in the affordable housing space as well. So we understand the space reasonably well. What I wanted to share is where we were coming at into this. So when we looked at this space initially, what was really scary was that, a lot of, I'm sure you all appreciate the impact of climate change. I shall not go there. But if you look at the combined effect of all of US's carbon emissions and of India's carbon emissions, the carbon emissions from buildings around the world is higher than those two put together, almost, or about the same, let's say. So buildings, if it was a country, it would be the largest in the world in terms of carbon emissions that are coming from it. But that's not it. What is even sort of worrying or scarier is that this is likely to double in the next 10 to 15 years. Maybe COVID has delayed this growth a little bit, but generally the predictions are that this will almost double very soon. And most of this growth, I would say 90% of this growth, is in developing countries. And as Monu mentioned earlier, India is half-built, as he said, and this is one of the reasons why, because people are still moving into cities. Those who are in cities are trying to progress, and rightly so, right? They're trying to find better homes and better opportunities. The families are getting, demographically, there's a shift there. They're getting more nuclear. So there's a lot of expansion and need of infrastructure and buildings across the world. But what is really important here is that whilst that investment is happening across the world, this is the scene from Angola, would you believe? This is happening not just here, but all around Africa, everywhere, this boom. And essentially what this means is that all of that, if you make a mistake here, we lock in that inefficiency for the next 70, 80 years. It's probably too late. When you look at Europe, when you look at US, it's very tough to refurbish these homes, to refurbish these buildings and retrofit them. It's much easier and much more cheaper to do them early in the design stage. And as developers, as building professionals, you would appreciate, as a point of contact, it's much easier to do 100 homes to one turn for us, right? So climate change, okay? But I think, if you look at, if you scratch the surface, the biggest danger in this is not only that the impact climate change, like COVID, would have on people's progress. India, China, developing countries have made huge progress in the last, couple of decades, maybe even 50 years, right? Huge progress in terms of alleviating poverty and getting people, out of extreme poverty. And a lot of that is because of urbanization and because of development. And climate change can actually erode a lot of that growth if you're not careful. So that's important. But just staying on the theme of low-income group, the issue is that, from a person's perspective, this green buildings or green affordable housing really makes sense, not just from an abstract idea of saving the planet, telling these people that they should be, climate sensitive is one thing, but it could really make a lot of tangible sense in terms of saving. People spend 5 to 10% in India, and Africa is even higher, would you believe? Almost 20-25% of the expendable income in utility, in gas, in electricity, and things like that, in fuels across the world. So this can really be meaningful because every money saved there is every money that they can use for children's education or health, right? So that's important. People also are struggling with power cuts, they're struggling with energy prices, and countries are struggling to meet demand, right? In terms of putting in the right power structure to make sure that all this works. So this is important from a very practical point of view, from the growth of our countries in the developing world. I wanted to also bring this here because I get this often, and I wanted to bring this up front. A lot of times green buildings are made about some sort of glamorous idea, and a lot of it is because it's come from top down, right? Sort of a high end coming down. But what I wanted to share here is that we had done some research in Maharashtra, and I picked a few families here. Most of the time, the bank that we were talking to, I shall not name it, was kept saying, actually expendable income for bills is not much. It's like 400 rupees per month, 400 rupees, 500 rupees. I said, no, I want to see the bills. Show me the bills, And yes, that was right. That typically, in the winter months, it is that. But you can see the curve. Each of these is a family. And we're talking about people who are borrowed about, and Modi, you would appreciate it, about 10 lakhs, 5 lakhs, that sort of range, right? So you can see that, there is, firstly, there's a huge swing between the winter and summer energy bills. And the second is the huge correlation with the temperature outside, which is interesting because although one assumes that most of these homes are not air conditioned, there is a huge sensitivity or correlation with outside temperature. So either some of these homes have some air conditioning, or they're having desert coolers or ceiling fans that are running all the time. So they are paying the price for climate to a large degree. So that's another thing I wanted to share as an interesting so what here. Okay, so in terms of what makes these buildings green, it's really not rocket science, right? I mean, especially in housing, it doesn't have to be simple things could be done, right? Better insulation, passive design, low energy fittings, water recycling, maybe have a smart meter, maybe have solar hot water system, maybe you have a little bit more, put some solar electricity to generate it on site, and perhaps look at low impact building materials and things like that, right? But what is interesting is that a lot of these things don't get done. Research has shown that 80% of opportunities that have less than 2 years payback, less than 1 year's payback, are not integrated into design. And the risk is, as I showed you the Angola example, the risk is we build all this and eventually, air conditioning split units and window units start getting mounted in our buildings and they all consume power, right? So that is really the challenge I wanted to bring. It's not so much that we don't know what technology works, it's just that they don't get added on early enough and get integrated early enough. So the question is, what we were trying to explore, and I shall go through some examples here, is what would make that work. Another reason why, why this does not work, or doesn't sometimes, I'm not saying, look, of course it does get integrated in some of the projects, but I'm talking about to make a significant difference, it's not getting added, is this thing called circle blame, as I call it. So if you ask yourself, do you want to stay in an energy efficient house? Most people say, yes, I want to be in an energy efficient house, right? And then if you ask the builders, they say there's no demand for it, or they say, the financiers don't want it, or there's no mechanism. So each one blames the other in a circle. Now, if you take the car industry, you don't get this, right? When you look at the car industry, it's a much more aligned industry. The car that you buy clearly has the mileage on it. You know how much you're going to consume, and you deliberately choose to have a higher mileage or lower mileage. So it's much more integrated here. There's a lot of what they call misalignment of incentives. Each one kind of blames the other for not having an effective model. So the question is, how do we break this conundrum? Before I dive into that, I also wanted to, kind of share that there's no one silver bullet for this, right? There is no housing that kind of meets all the demands. Obviously, there's a private sector part, which we shall be focused on today, in terms of solutions. But in terms of financial solutions, or even in terms of instruments that one would use to convert these markets, there could be very different solutions for different things. What you would do for an EWS social housing would be closer to, say, a PPP, or kind of possibly look at subsidies, or look at building materials and informal sector, all the way to townships, where you might start looking at green bonds and raising money in a very different way, or probably looking at green infrastructure and things that you manage this better. So what I wanted to share here was that different segments, different things start to make more sense. So the bulk of my presentation shall go into what we are seeing in the markets, both developed and developing, in the green affordable housing space. Okay. I'll still start with building codes. Okay. Green building codes are basically regulations that could come in that says, you shall build, as you saw, we know the technologies, so why not just enforce it? And it has worked in places like Indonesia. I and my team have been working in Indonesia, Philippines, and Colombia, and other places where we are helping governments and cities sometimes governments, national governments, sometimes state governments, sometimes regional governments, really enforcing the decree and the code. And it has worked. So for Jakarta, the way we approach it is we take a certain country, we do, we have a laundry list of what sort of technologies we could look at. For example, what if we had smaller windows, in Jakarta? Remember, this is equatorial climate. If you had shading, what difference would it make? And how much would you save? You build a model, we do a survey, we understand that. And what is interesting is that we look at the saving and then we say, what is the cost and what is the payback? And should be included or not? And the basic parameter is, if it's, so yes, everything saves, right? So if you look at this, lighting controls, 0.2%. Yeah, it's great to have. It has a positive effect, but it's only 0.2% reduction. Whereas if you look at, say, sorry, I've got the wrong one here. I wanted to do shading. If you look at shading, you can see 17% reduction. So shading has to be one of the key things that one could do in an equatorial climate, and so on. Right? So you can have a strong payback here. So you could actually make choices based on that. Unfortunately, not all regulations have that deliberate view. A lot of times we just cookie cutter paste things from other places that don't really necessarily make sense to the end customer. It might have some effect, but it's too much issues to kind of scale this up. But over the last 5 to 6 years, we found that Jakarta has been a great story for us. Actually, we were very skeptical. It's not so different from India in terms of its implementation capacity, but somehow they managed to get enough projects the size of 1/3 of office buildings in Manhattan. You can imagine that's a big size, right? So they managed to scale that many new construction office buildings, particularly to meet this demand. So it feels good in terms of impact. And overall, so we've worked in Indonesia, we've worked in Philippines, in Colombia, in Bangladesh, Maldives, Costa Rica, Peru, and so on. You get the sense. Some places it's worked really well. Vietnam really well. In Philippines, Bangladesh, no. So it is a bit of a hit and miss. It needs a lot of political will, as you know, and as I'm aware that even the Indian codes that were launched in 2007 are yet to be fully implemented in some of these countries. So it is an instrument. I wanted to just go through the various ideas and share where it has worked, what has the lessons learned. But this is one which you would bring forward where you have a clear government mandate, an ability and interest to manage, right? That really makes sense, right? So I wanted to bring another country, China, which has been really effective. Nothing to do with us or IFC, but you can see that, from 2007 to 2013, almost 100% of all projects, I must confess, this is really urban projects, and that urban is the main part of China. Almost, you can see, this is the design stage compliance. It really started with just the design stage compliance. We also had after construction checks, and you can see pretty good results. With China, you may want to take it with a bit of pinch of salt, but it's still pretty impressive in terms of the impact that has, right? And really, the government has been pretty successful. Sorry, I'm just going to move this up. I'm getting my, there it is. So very successful at enforcing, particularly in urban areas. What is also impressive is how early they've been thinking about this. Since 1980s. Even UK has only been thinking about building codes or just putting installation on buildings since 90s. So they've been really ahead of the game. And what they've been also doing is not just launch it once and then forget about it. Every decade, and more closer, they have targets, right? So the baselines for how much you need to improve keeps improving as well. So they keep enforcing higher and higher standards. And just to give you an idea that their standard right now is 10%, better than US's standard for building codes. So it's kind of pretty impressive in terms of what they're able to achieve as a developing country, right? So it's quite commendable. Obviously, it's a country where enforcement is the right channel, and that sort of suits it, right? I wanted to share that one in terms of lessons there. Okay, now switching gear. So if that was the stick, that was the enforcing kind of stick. There are other ways to do this. So some of the countries like Europe and US are looking at information, knowledge to raise awareness and to mobilize action, right? So in US, most of the states have this thing called Energy Star that gives them a label when you are on the top 15 percentile of projects, and you get an Energy Star, and thousands of projects, hundreds of thousands of projects have been certified under Energy Star for new construction, and almost all new construction in Europe has the energy labeling program. So a bit like your appliance label, like the B label, this is A, B, C, D, all the way to G. And this is important because then you know what your stock looks like. So any project that is built newly or being sold or being rented out has to have this label attached to this. And that really is quite interesting in terms of what you can do with it, right? So that's been quite good. What it allows you to do, I wanted to share this, is that, and Moni, you would appreciate this, is that, with Energy Star particularly, you can see that, they have found that right through the 2008 crisis, the financial crisis, the default on loans with homes that have Energy Star, and we talk about 70,000 homes with Energy Star rating compared to 160,000 homes without Energy Star rating. So that's the control sample. It was done by university. We've been checking that very clearly to make sure there's no fudge. A third less default on loans, delinquency rate. That's pretty impressive correlation. You can't really say the causation because we don't really know, but that's pretty good for a bank. So we are finding more and more such examples to showcase, because I think if this is true, then you can start looking at interest rates and things adjustment if you're green, right? Without needing external incentives to do it. But also for a builder, the real results have shown that the sale price is they're able to get 9 to 10%, a higher premium on that. Maybe not such a great idea for affordable housing, but developer needs to recover the money. They can't be paying for these things, and ideally you want the client to recognize it and buy the better product, right? That's kind of what your ultimate aim is. So that's worked. Quicker sale is another one. You can see 4 times faster, 14 times 18 days faster. And for the customer, this is really good, and for the bank, is the resale value, right? This is important because after 30 years, you want to see that the value of the house is actually higher than the standard house. So that's important, and that's also coming through, which is nice to see. Okay, so we are also trialing this in some of the countries where the client country has asked us to do this. So like in Mongolia, we're using the European model, using our Edge platform, which I'll come to later, using the engine of Edge to come up with a labeling platform that really makes it easy. Because Mongolia is 90% about heating. It's a ferociously cold place. They talk about minus 40 degrees Celsius, right? So heating is the 90% of the load, and most of the pollution is because of coal burning and so on. So heating is the main driver. You can see that we've got it here, and we've come up with a certificate platform. Because of COVID, things are held up, but this is about to be launched, and it should be going to the market soon. Okay, so switching gear now. So that was, you heard me talk about regulations, you heard me talk about information. The second thing, the last piece is the sort of financing part, okay? So this is an example where one of the largest banks, it's a semi-public bank, if you like, it's SOE, state-owned enterprise, which has provident funds of all employees in the country. So they have 60-70% of all mortgages in the country, and they do close to 1 million mortgages a year, right? So it's fairly large. And Mexico is a middle-income country, according to us, so it's pretty big. They tried to do a green mortgage about 2013, and initially they only had 1,000 homes, maybe 2,000 homes, and they provided a smaller, they had a small higher loan-to-value, slightly higher requirements for loan-to-value, and that really started to scale up. Once people saw the value of these homes, you can see all of them have solar panels and things like that. And so they had a very simple checklist of what sort of things they want to include. And because Infonovit had a mechanism, I think a lot of the banks in India also have this. They have a valuer that goes to check the site, right? And after and before, they were able to supervise this and execute it really well through their own initiative. And that's really meant that within 3 years, almost all the homes, they decided to drop normal mortgage, only have green mortgage as a product now. So it's been so successful in terms of scaling up. So it's a really heartwarming story of a bottom-up approach. We're talking about affordable housing. You may question whether this is the right kind of housing one should build. That's another issue altogether. But I wanted to bring this innovation in financial innovation. And how they do that, I wanted to share, was that, let's say, it doesn't matter what the currency is. I'm going to use dollars here. So if you imagine a standard mortgage and a normal green mortgage, and both have the same base price, let's say a greenhouse, I'm going to use green home here, so has a 3% higher cost. So the bank kind of says, fine, we'll take that on, so in terms of the income multiplier, they can adjust that and allow this person to borrow. So they take a little bit of a hit, the bank takes a bit of an increase, they keep the interest rate the same, term the same. What happens is the mortgage payment obviously is higher than a normal mortgage. You can see it's about, whatever that is, about $22 higher. a little bit less than that, actually, $12 higher. So, but you can see that the utility savings from that investment is accounted for. And what that means is ultimately the monthly ownership cost, monthly EMI, plus the utility bill is lower for the green versus the standard. And that's really the tangible value, right? So, and I've not even included the other value of higher sale price, lower delinquency rate risk, all of that other stuff. But just typically, this is one of the simplest way to build a green mortgage system, essentially. So I just wanted to share this for those who are from the financial sector. Okay, one of our own investments. I'm trying to not keep this just to our own investments and our own story. I wanted to share there are a lot of others doing this good stuff too, and a lot of innovation that's happening around the world. This is one of ours. In Colombia, we had really not done much in terms of green building. We just had one investment, a green bond, which we did about a few years ago, and we lent to this chap here. He's a bit like Monu, really champion of it. He's been doing a lot of sustainable energy financing. We said, why don't you have a go at having green construction finance? And he took we bought some green bond of his, about not a lot, $100 million investment. It's a large bank in Colombia, as you can imagine, and they themselves voluntarily decided to give a lower interest rate loan, 0.5 to 2%, depending on the developer's risk. And that's really, and then we helped the bank kind of socialize that, raise awareness in 17 countries with 300 property developers. And then we teamed up with the local a construction, a bit like CREDAI. We teamed up with their equivalent of CREDAI called Camacol to really start to kind of promote this with developers, right? And over 2 years, you can see the ramp up. We've got, actually, this is a little old now, but even now it still starts to continue. And since then, we've done 3 other banks in Colombia and really changed the market. I mean, I wouldn't say change the market, but we've hit the sort of large targets that we want to see happen, from a financial sector. That's really rewarding. And since then also, they've made other bond issues, and they've raised a lot more capital at the back of it, which we have not been part of, which is, we see our role as kind of initiating these things, and we don't have to be a participant in all of those other kind of aspects in it. So broadly speaking, from a finance perspective, there's an opportunity for green construction finance, and I just name dropped a few companies that are doing this already. There's the opportunity for green mortgage finance. If you are investing in a green construction finance portfolio, a lot of banks have green construction developer finance, or bridge finance, and mortgage finance. And there's an opportunity to cross-sell this, right? And there's an opportunity to package all of this and have it in the capital markets issued as a green bond. So that's kind of the value. I don't want to stay too long, as this may not be the subject matter for a lot of you, but I just want to mention that quickly before I move on. Okay. So what are we trying to do here? I wanted to bring all of this into one aspect. A lot of projects, we hear a lot of that are green. It's still very small amount, maybe 1 or 2% of India is still going for green. But we feel there is an approach, just like in India and other places, to have a metrics-driven, finance-focused, scalable approach in the market. And that's kind of our edge platform as we see it. And we feel like this is the missing approach. If we can bring some of the sort of angles that I mentioned earlier into one place, we can really transform the market. That's kind of what is exciting to us. And what we have in the market is 3 things. We have a free software, which I'll quickly demo. We've also simplified what green building means. This means a lot to me. I feel like in all this trying to be very clever, we have forgotten what it is that we want to do ultimately, right? Yes, we can talk about ecology and cycle racks and history and all of the other stuff, but fundamentally, is the asset resource efficient? Has to be the core of what green building means, at least it is to us. And we set a minimum standard of 20% so that there is no unpredictability, and that banks love it, because if we know that we have a minimum standard, we can start to scale it up, right? And we have a labeling program to back that. Okay, so what I wanted to share is quickly switch to, let's see if this works. Where is it? There we are. Here. So this is our website, edgebuildings.com. You can see hundreds of projects that have gone through this system. And what we have is a simple tool that makes it really easy for people to use and understand what difference it makes. And it's for different types of buildings. Those who have interest in other types, you can have a look at that. But I shall stay with housing. And you have information and data for different cities across across India. So you can choose, whichever you wish, and it has the relevant local data for that, in terms of energy cost, water cost, solar radiation, diesel price, all of that. And you can choose different types of buildings. And you could say, okay, I'm actually a 3-bedroom, 80 square meters, and 10 stories, and it automatically has default areas. And when you're ready, you can go about and change that if you're not happy with it, right? What it quickly does is that gives you the energy, water, material prediction. So in terms of energy, you can see, it tells you quickly where is the energy going to be used in the building. And this is your building. So I just hide this here. This is base case and this is improved case. And what it does is that as you start to say, okay, I'm going to have reflective paint, I'm going to have insulation or shading on my windows or whatever, it starts to tell you what difference it makes, you see? And it also tells you, as you're doing these things, what is the incremental cost of doing these things here, right? And you know what the baseline cost is. And you can use these things to sell it to your end customer, right? So you can do more. You can do your lighting, you can do solar hot water. You can come back and actually put in more data. If you have better data, you can say, okay, actually I'm going to meet 100% of all the hot water demand and put it here. So all of this is built into the tool. On the energy, I won't go into the water and materials. It's fairly straightforward to do. And once you have it, you can get your project certified. For those who are interested, I can go into that, but that's not my intention to go into the details of this. But you can also look at this is very important to me. I feel like there's a lot that we can all learn from each other in the developing countries rather than always look to the West. So if you want to know what is this project in Indonesia like or the other projects in Costa Rica like, you can look it up. You can actually learn about, these are actually built projects. There's a little story about it. It tells you what difference they made in terms of, and what technologies they've used. So it's not just about, I got a platinum or a silver or anything like that. It's really about how much did I save and what is the carbon emission saving. And for those who are interested in marketing this, you have a URL on the World Bank server that you can share it with your end customers. You can share it with your financials, and use that as a leverage to get favorable customers, right? That's kind of the aim of this. So I'll go back to my presentation, and I can come back to that if anybody has any questions on that piece, right? So hold on. Right. So I mentioned 20%. A lot of you might be familiar with the 20% of edge. That's the minimum standard. But we're seeing more and more demand, especially the portfolio clients, to go for 40%. We call it edge advanced, where we get 40% on energy and 20% on water and materials. Of course, you can do whatever size and scale you want to achieve. And because of climate change, we're getting a lot of kind of property developers and people who are kind of, corporate clients looking at 100% as well, zero carbon building. So we're trying to meet that demand too. I wanted to bring one thing that we think is quite important for scaling up green affordable housing is that every certificate is not just for the development. Every house owner gets a certificate because it's important that, the person living on the basement is buying that basement flat is as good as the one on top, right? So you want to make sure that the end customer that is going to the bank and saying, I've got a greenhouse, please give me a green mortgage, has a proper proof of evidence that can be traced. That's important. Okay. And we have teamed up, IFC and World Bank does not issue the certificate. We have teamed up with the same people who lead certificate and others to offer this across the world, right? There are different parties in different countries that do the certification. On the financing side, Edge has really transformed the financing space in developing countries because, people like the bonds, the climate bonds, and the people that write the green bonds principles have recognized this, have taken this as a basic principle to use this in developing countries to identify green bond opportunities in the financing space. So that's something to watch out for. And that's been really great in terms of scaling. So just quickly, some of the stories. So I was mentioning, so where have we really been successful? We were talking about scaling up, not just bringing another certification, right? So places like Vietnam, Costa Rica, Colombia, South Africa, we've been able to do almost 6% of all new construction to have EDGE certified buildings. So developers have really absorbed it. We are really keen for Indian customers to do the same, to be able to take this reward. And then also in South Africa, there've been great stories where we have made some investments, others have joined forces, and really developers have gone ahead and announced that, They're going to make all their properties to be green, about 16,000 units, Baldwin properties. And hearing that banks, without us doing anything in the market, other than just allowing this to be, banks like ABSA, ABSA, has offered green mortgages because they see that the largest property developer is now doing green as a standard basis. Why not offer the green mortgage? So that's something to think about, is come up with the nexus of having developers and the financials kind of working hand in hand. And we can help in creating that ecosystem to scale things up, along with the Green Building Council and people like that, right? I wanted to play a quick video to give you a sense of what this really looks like in reality, because me saying it is different from what it is like. So just bear with me. It's a 2-minute video. I wanted to quickly run that. Okay.
This is Candlewood Crescent. I'm proud to say it was the first EDGE certified residential development in South Africa. Our saving in this complex is 30% over and above base case on electricity and 30% over base case on water.
We have a smart meter that allows us to use solar energy as well, to complement the electricity that we get.
And it gives feedback to the tenant on the actual electricity consumption.
With the smart meter, I can save up to 400 Rand a month.
EDGE, I think, is most definitely a game changer. I believe in things that are tangible and have tangible results.
Okay. So hopefully that is useful. What I wanted to take away there, for you to take away there, is the developers talking in terms of numbers of how much their clients save. I think that's where the conversation needs to shift from just talking abstractly of green buildings. If we can talk about how much a certain person saves, it's important. So remember, he was talking about 30 to 40%. We did an analysis because the same developer has 500 units of EDGE certified and non-EDGE certified properties in the same development. And we have this opportunity because they rented the properties out. So we have exactly the same unit, and we're finding the difference to be close to 40 to 60%. You can see here, and that's a huge savings for the end customer. So we are beginning to collect more of this data. So watch the space as we start launching more of this information of, real savings. So we want to shift this conversation from green buildings about nice to have and saving the planet to how much can you save affordable housing customer. That's important, right? That's kind of where we wanted to go. So I wanted to quickly run through some of the ways, as some of you are developers, I understand, how other developers have managed to integrate green and how have they paid for this, right? So this client, Imperial Homes, did EDGE certification. You can see they got 30% higher energy performance, 28% water, and 38% embodied energy. And you can see they have photovoltaics. This is for very low-end customers. We're talking about very, low-price homes. And they managed to what they did cleverly is that every house has a solar photovoltaic and the PV lease-back program attached to it. So what the customer does is he buys the, let's say, 5 lakh house, and then they pay for the photovoltaic as they pay for the energy bills. And that's pay-as-you-use program that they built in, and a customer can sign in and do this. In the Philippines, where this is based, the energy cost is pretty high. So really customers love this idea of having this built in. It really makes sense also because you don't have to retrofit this. The initial cost is included in the mortgage. All of these are big benefits to the end customer, right? I wanted to give another example. This is in Gujarat, where I think the developer was saying that actually because they're doing all of these things to save energy in terms of water recycling and low energy lighting platform and managing pumps and things like that, solar aspects, they really are able to save 80% of the maintenance cost. And apparently the local place, where close to Ahmedabad, people are really sensitive to what the maintenance cost is. That's another angle I thought is interesting. Rather than just focus on operating cost of the house, is looking at what is the selling point for you, and that could be the maintenance cost for the end customer, right? For every unit. Another one. This is another one in Bangalore, VPHC. Some of you may know this. And here, yes, there is an additional cost. I wanted to share this that there is a cost, but it's not 30% more, right? It's somewhere between 0.5 to 2% roughly. It depends on what sort of scale you're looking at and how early and you're including this in the design process. But let's say there's a 2% additional cost. And the way the client is dealing with this is because they're building it faster using this formwork concrete, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. It was a big innovation 10 years ago. And basically, they're able to use that, building it faster to use the capital better to compensate for that additional cost and really not increase the price of the home. So these are some of the ways that people are improvising and the new business models are evolving. I wanted to end with this last couple of slides. When it comes to homes, green doesn't have to be a nice to have or a kind of a fancy thing, eco this and eco that. It could really be very tangible. Using Edge, you can explain to your end customers that your home is comfortable, and by making sure that the passive design elements are integrated, like better whitewash, shading, simple things that Indians do really well in terms of, or historically have been doing quite well in terms of insulating and things like that. Or it could be about efficiency, so you could have one for the middle income that really focuses on including energy efficient fans and refrigerators and solar hot water systems built in, and really make this all about every paisa saved and every paisa earned for the end customer, right? So that could be quite good if you're able to kind of show that they're saving 25,000 rupees, 6,000 rupees in terms of savings as well, that they can recycle into the project. Or it could be about resilience. A lot of the places where I'm sure you work, there's a lot of power cuts and energy issues. It could be about making sure the houses have built-in energy generation on site and water recycling and things like that. So there could be other selling points that one could use to really showcase your project. A couple of ending things. So I feel like a lot of the places, the governments are getting this. I think they're really realizing that, there needs to be incentives as well. So we're seeing tax incentives for Edge across various places, including bonus density in Pune, in some of the places like Peru. We're seeing huge growth because of the bonus density, meaning being allowed to build an extra floor or a little higher FSI if you're green. And I think places in North India also have had it, and with mixed success, I believe. But there are other models. I won't go into each of them, but there are other ways that governments, and you can look at our website to get a chance to see what other governments are doing across the board. And also banks. I wanted to bring this out. I think we need to get banks like IIFL more involved. You can see that, it needn't just be about low interest rates, loans. It could be about technical assistance. It could be about premium on, covering the insurance premium a little bit for housing. There could be other ways that you could actually incentivize the end customer. And really don't do it because it's a good thing to do. Do it because it's good business, right? That could be the way. Oh, I think I got muted here, but okay. So I just want to end saying that, these are our donors that have been supporting us over the last decade, and we're very grateful for their help. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prashant. It's a great presentation. I'd like to just summarize a few things. I think the big thing to be visible in your presentation was the stories were from developing countries. The stories were not from developed countries. The stories were from Jakarta. China also is getting built. Mongolia, Mexico, South Africa, Philippines, Colombia. So as much we all believe that this is not a story meant for the lesser developed nations, it's actually a story coming from there. So I think that would give a host of confidence to all the participants today. It's a story to be built in the developing countries. And as one of the questions which came up was by Mr. Bakeri was on the cost is a key in India. I'm sure because the stories are coming from developing countries, it means cost is a key there as well. And I'm sure, I'm sure in our own business as well, we assume that everything is, we have a conventional way of thinking, so very difficult to change. That's what I a lot of times learn, right? So I think actually it is not just the cost. It is about the comfort and the confidence of executing something, the cost element, and will it translate to faster sales? And I think what Edge is doing it is that the technical know-how is very simplified, very quantifiable for anybody to relate to and measure and execute. So a lot of times this execution things get left out, and which is the real part of the story. So it's quite amazing on that side, right? So There's one question from Ashu Gupta. She's saying, "Dear Prashant, very nice presentation. I heard about Hotel Green Revitalization Program by IFC. Can you please highlight that program as well?"
So, okay, that's a slightly different sector. But, we're finding that because of COVID, the hospitality sector is really badly hit. And one of the initiatives we are looking to launch to help the hoteliers, with their properties is, rather than look at it as a way to kind of rescue them through subsidies, is try to see if we can use this opportunity to make these hotels more energy efficient. That basically gives them two things. One is it helps them on the bottom line because they save on the running costs of the hotel. That directly impacts their bottom line. But also, as they save, they also make it more competitive in terms of winning new customers to be able to offer better prices. And by having the green branding, they can invite customers onto their hotel. So this is a new idea. We are looking at expanding. Our focus has been somewhat focused on new construction, and now we're looking at the refurbishment space as well, perhaps starting with the hotel industry. So watch this space, and would love to, if somebody wants to know more, I can go deeper and explain this further.
So just one final remark from you, Prashant. How do you see this cost implication, which is a very big deterrent for the developers usually? What's your take to make a reasonably sustainable, efficient green building? What could be the cost implications for following the EDGE norm?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, look, I would be lying if I said there's no cost at all, right? I think it can be built at very low cost. We're talking about 1%, 2%, depending on the size of the project. So we're really talking about, I'm talking about construction costs. I'm not talking about value of the property.
Construction.
So it's, yeah. So that's what we're seeing in the market. There are properties that are actually cheaper as well. So it's not like that's the only way. We have a study that shows for different cities what is the cost differentiator. But if you think of 1 to 2% cost difference, if you look at our markets in India, there isn't that kind of perfect market where the cost is so perfect in terms of the margins, right? That can easily be kind of, it'll be caught up in the rounding errors in terms of the sale price. So I would focus on that. But my take is that if you can do it early in the design process, this is where Ashok's input, I'm sure, will be critical. It can make a big difference to the actual cost at the end.
So I think the gist of the story is recognize it early and inbuilt in the design itself. Now, I would like to just call upon Mr. Ashok B Lall. I think our relationship can be very easily pegged from the day we started eKutumb. So reference points are already etched in history, I think, right, sir? So thank you so much, sir, for once again agreeing to be part of this. Mr. Ashok B Lall has studied architecture and fine arts at the University of Cambridge, UK, and then had his diploma from Architectural Association from London in 1970. So he established his firm in 1981, and I can say very, very clearly and honestly that he's one of the leading lights of sustainable architecture in India, and we have learned a lot with him. And he's developed various projects across the country. So he's so you've heard from the guru of making EDGE, and now you're going to listen from a guru who's made it happen in India, and very much some of the projects will be very close to you. He's done projects in Gujarat, in Chennai, and some projects in NCR as well. And his presentations have been very insightful and close to, I would say, the practical sense of the Indian context. And off to you, sir. And stage is all yours. Thank you so much, sir.
We always start the story by saying that when I go to buy a home, I have so many things in my mind. It's not about sustainability. It's not even exactly about cost and the savings I'm going to make, the promise of saving my electricity bills and so on. It's not even exactly about that. It's very complicated. And there's so many thoughts involved. And this is one of the problems of design, that first of all, I'm actually looking for something which is basically meets my needs. I want to make sure that where I go, I'll get regular bijli, I'll get regular clean water, the place will be well looked after, and it'll be a pleasant place to live in. I really want to make sure about that. And I also want to make sure that I'm moving to a safe structure. And if I'm told, and can be made sure, that where you live, you're likely to be safe and comfortable, it'll be a place which will be healthy for you to live in. That should be the base from which I have to then launch into my new life after I bought, a house with all my savings put in. And what that produces is that while we as designers and builders take care of providing the basics, we also build into the design the possibility of communities which see a better future, and then the place becomes a place which gives them self-esteem and eventually community benefits, which really amount to some sort of self-fulfillment, being part of a community that is doing well. And that's the problem with design, I would say. The other thing I want to emphasize is that many of our participants here today, I'm sure, are people who are not necessarily building in the big cities. In fact, the growth of population that is occurring, the urbanization that's occurring, is occurring around the second tier and third tier cities much quicker than in the big cities. And this is where you can be doing a project not very far from the place of work. You can be doing a project where the land is not that expensive. And it is the place where people are also finding life is much more livable compared to the very big city, where life is actually quite strenuous and full of tension. And this is the process that is going to occur in the next few decades. So I would say that our small developers, the medium-sized developers, actually have the biggest role in providing adequate housing for our growing populations of cities. You are a key component of the development of the nation. It's going to be a great service if you can make it work. If you can make work this diagram, which says that affordability is actually connected to sustainability. And I'll explain that to you a little bit more as we go along. That if you can be resource efficient in the utilization of land, in the utilization of energy, and if you can be low carbon in the utilization of material, you'll probably find that your costs are actually coming down. Low carbon also means low steel, by the way. And if your costs are coming down, it means that you can be better located for your homes in relation to the rest of the city. So this green part of this Venn diagram is where the solution really lies. And once again, this is just a story to tell you that we're seeing this today because of COVID. So many people have gone back home because they were sharing 4 people to a single room somewhere, in terrible circumstances, earning a daily bread. But as their employment fell off, they had to go back home because they couldn't afford to pay the rent. There is now a new rental policy that is in the offing. And maybe one of the things that developers can be thinking about, and even financing institutions can be thinking about, is how to give a fillip to the possibility of rental housing coming into the future. Once again, it'll have to be the small and medium-sized developer who will meet the needs of the person whom I call the temporary migrant or the recently settled migrant, as against the established settled citizen who has been in the city for the last 20 years and take a good bank loan and pay it off, etc., etc. I think it's again the middle-sized developer who is going to be the man or the person who solved the real housing problem. Some technical stuff now. We all know these costs. If you build 4 stories, 3 to 4 stories, your structure will cost you 900 rupees or 1,000 rupees a square foot. You go taller, it becomes more expensive to build. It takes longer to build. You go taller still, it becomes even more expensive to build. So here's the strategy. Go to a place where the land is not so expensive, where you can build more economically, and where people will then come to stay and buy your homes. I think it is not going to work if you're going to go to a multi-story housing in Mumbai or Mangalore and call it affordable. It's simply not going to work there, right? It is not affordable. We also see, and this is for Prashant to see, that there is a direct correlation between the height of the building and the carbon emissions that it has in its construction because of the consumption of steel and cement. It goes up considerably. And this we don't realize, it also adds to cost, as we saw earlier. And so there is a good reason from environmental point of view, from social point of view also, to think of building at a lower height. A low rise or mid-rise works much better. And therefore, here's my recommendation, and I think investors, financiers, people in policy need to think of how planning regulations can incentivize low carbon technologies. Where you consume steel less, that should be incentivized. Where you consume more steel than could be done otherwise by more careful design and lower building heights, I think you should be penalized. That's my view. So that's on what we call embodied energy and the impact of embodied energy on carbon emissions. This is also important that as we move from natural comfort by ventilation or ceiling fans towards air conditioning, we are going to have an explosion of carbon dioxide emissions because of the consumption of electricity demanded by this. And why does this become necessary? I would argue that it becomes primarily necessary because of poor design, irresponsible, poor design. So it's not about doing only the right thing, but avoiding what could be a poor design. I won't go into the technicalities of this in the interest of time, but I just want to share with you some results of some research that we did a couple of years ago, in which we compared on many factors the difference between low-rise building, medium-rise building, and high-rise building from the point of view of affordability and environmental appropriateness. And this is what we find. It's interesting that if you look at open area per person, if you count the terraces also as accessible space and the outdoor spaces and the balconies, etc., as accessible space, you find that there's more open area per person if you're building 4 stories high. If you talk about embodied energy efficiency, it's better when you're building low. Operational energy, huge improvement. I mean, 4 stories, hardly any operational energy. The moment you go to 7, 8 stories, go to 20 stories, you're tripling, quadrupling, increasing 5 times operational energy. So your running costs, your maintenance costs goes up. Very interesting. Prashant was mentioning this case, solar roof potential. Our calculation has shown that if you build low rise or to 4 stories high, and you devote, say, 60% of the roof area to solar photovoltaics, for which you can have a financing mechanism, etc., you can meet the energy demands of simple living of all the homes below that roof. As you go taller and taller, that potential runs away from you. So a city that is going to be low carbon living in the future, affordable for everyone, right, would be low rise with solar roofs. That's what it's going to be. So I think we should promote that and present that as a viable alternative. In design itself, there are things that don't cost you anything at all. Zero cost, only design. Orientation. Try and face all the windows that open, the large windows that open to the outside, towards the north and the south. Avoid the east and the west. If you have to provide east and the west, make sure they are well shaded on east and west. That reduces the heat that gets into the building and therefore reduces the need for even fans, makes you more comfortable, certainly reduces the need for air conditioning. And if you build in a way where you share a lot of walls, long buildings with walls shared in this fashion, again, your exposure to the outside is much reduced. And cost has come down in this design, can you not see? Cost has come down. So By design, you make the building more livable and more cost efficient, right? And you reduce the energy demand of the building by design without extra cost. External shading, Prashant was mentioning, extremely important. It is very important at very marginal cost to provide some sort of a frame where you may not do the full shading system, but people can always add it conveniently outside the windows. And that reduces the heat gain. But what are we seeing in the market? What are we seeing in the market? For some stupid reason, people are adding more and more glass and exposed to the sun. And what do residents have to do? They have to put cloth outside to protect themselves from this extremely poor design. Why are we doing this? For fashion? Total nonsense. The residents will tell you, you've got it wrong. So please, smaller windows, shading on the outside. We actually did this for a developer. We did a very careful technical study looking at several cases in which we said, well, if you have a large window with little shading, you compare it with a little shading with a smaller window, and then you have a small window at the end where there's better shading around it according to the orientation of the window, and you add a little bit of assisted ventilation to it, what do you find? The results show that this is for Mumbai actually, for the month of March, when it gets very, very hot, March, April gets very hot, that if you get the design right, you're within the comfort zone on 3 consecutive days of the heat of March. And therefore, you don't need air conditioning. But if you get it wrong, you're outside the comfort zone and you will ask for air conditioning. And then your electricity bill will go up. And then, well, you simply blame the weather. But no, you should not be blaming the weather. You should be blaming the designer and the builder. That's what my advice will be to the buyer. Know that this can be done. And insulating the roof, most important, because the top floor deserves to get as much comfort as the middle floor or the lower floor. Must insulate the roof, use the reflective floor on top. Somebody wants to sell a house which is not insulated on the roof, I'm not going to buy it. And I'd advise the whole world not to buy it. All right? Why should I suffer? Right? Even if you give me some discount, why should I suffer? This is very doable and hardly adds 0.5% to the overall cost of the building. And in low-cost housing project in Rajkot, all this has been done by a government authority, believe it or not. And we have a lot of materials now that are available, which are low embodied energy materials. I would say that if we get sales tax or excise exemption, or now we have GST exemption on these materials. Now there's, GST exemption on rental housing schemes of a certain scale. Why can't there be GST exemption on appropriate materials? It just makes a lot of sense because you save on the electricity demand for the nation as a whole. You save on carbon dioxide emissions. You save on comfort, on health, and so on. And this is something somebody should do an economic analysis to say, not charging GST on appropriate materials is a great saving for the nation. So simple design, shading, shaded roof with reflective finish on the top. And you can test this out on large scale. Now we have done these schemes and tested out the behavior of the buildings, oriented in different directions and so on. And we find that correct design makes a lot of sense and it does not cost you anything extra. Well, if you do need to put in an air conditioner, yes, there's a place for it, but you hardly need any power. And it'll, you can do with 0.75 ton air conditioning unit when people are putting in 1.5 ton air conditioning unit, which is not, because of that design, or because the 0.75 air conditioning unit is not become a popular sales item. But I tell you, it makes a lot of sense. What can we do when we say we care for the design? Yes, water efficiency and energy efficiency. And I'm telling you some very simple things that you can do. Make sure that every home has a home meter for water. I will not have fights with my neighbor. I will not think that I'm being overcharged by the community for my regular water charges, 300 rupees a month, 500 rupees a month, 1,000 rupees a month, because I consume water and I'm responsible for the consumption of my water. Individual home meters, definitely a good idea. An exhaust in the kitchen, build it in, provide the exhaust fan. A damn good idea. It keeps the house from building up heat. It, takes out the heat that is being generated in the kitchen, makes the kitchen also more comfortable space. And this is a very simple thing to do. And any developer should, in my opinion, simply offer this as a standard fitting. We are most concerned about how public spaces are maintained. So build in now a system for sorting at home. Very simple, no cost whatsoever, but build it down. It shows the concern of the designer and the builder for the life of the community that is going to be lived in the spaces you build and sell. If you express this concern with these little things, I'm sure you have a better client, you have more clients coming to you because you care for them. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, that if you use solar PV, you can make sure that your pumping system for water supply will be absolutely safe and sound and can be resilient. You know what we are finding? That if you've got 300 homes, you can treat the wastewater on your compound and recycle it for flushing and for irrigation at very affordable prices. Okay? And this is amazing because it doesn't cost much, but it saves a lot. And what is most important for somebody who's going to buy a house, you can say, look, there's going to be water shortage everywhere, but your community is going to be safe because it is careful about the use of water and is able to recycle wastewater, reduce the consumption by a significant component, 30 to 40% reduction in the consumption of water. So being water resilient is going to be a demand of the future. Similarly, the possibility of solar PV on the roof is going to be a demand of the future. And these small community systems, which are self-standing, can over time be connected to the municipal system that will come. Our municipalities are poor. They'll take a long time to come to serve all the communities that are growing on the edges of the city, but we cannot wait for that. But we can design in such a way that we can connect to them in time to come. And of course, the homes are not finished products. Everybody works with their home, makes improvements. They enclose the balconies, they add shading systems, they do all kinds, they paint their own outside, and they maintain it. They're proud of their homes. And they even do some modifications to the inside. And here's an example of what the bare building was when it was bought and how people start using the spaces that have been provided. The shading frame is an invitation to do a better job for your window. And here it is, everybody beginning to use it in a particular way. And there are other technologies now in the offing which save on steel, speed up construction, give you a good finish. I won't go into the technologies in detail here, but there are methods of reducing the consumption of steel that reduces the cost of construction without losing the speed of construction, I can tell you. Here are a few examples that are here. And a new technology in the offing, which is an interlocking concrete block, a constrained masonry system for 4-story construction where you don't consume more than 2.5 kg of steel per square foot of built area. Amazingly economical, very quick to build. So look out for new technologies. Don't go only for the convention. Look for innovation too. This is how it works. And I think there is a lot of saving to be made by rationalizing our planning regulations for affordability. Some of the demands of planning require too much space to be left over for vehicles that don't exist, fire tenders that never have to come there. And they don't even allow you to earn your living within your home. They say that that should be located somewhere else. So mixed land use is also another thing that needs to be promoted. Slowly we are getting there, but our planning regulations are way behind at the moment. And I think as developers, recognizing being close to the need of the resident, of the buyer, we need to influence policy in the right direction for better affordability. Same goes for the internal spaces. Some of the rules and regulations about showers and kitchens and toilets are they just make you spend money for no reason whatsoever. You know, so you have something which is on the left-hand side, which is according to the prescriptions of the bylaws, and something that works very well on the right-hand side and much more economical to build, right? But it doesn't service it doesn't meet the bylaw requirement. Again, bylaws need to be responsive to the needs for affordability. And I do believe that for affordable housing, there needs to be a centralized building code, a recommended national building code, which should supersede local building codes, and it should ensure health and safety, right? And work out in such a way that it improves affordability. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And I think it brings to light the same point of what Prashant was also saying, is that is it all about cost? And it's like, as he said, that it's at the right moment, the intervention, which is most important, right? So if you are intervening at the right moment and you have the right expert advice on the design itself, then the costs will take a backseat. But if you want to transform a existing design into a green design, then cost can be anything, because then you have to redo those things. And I think there are some misnomers, or I would say misappropriate correlations in terms of giving roof height windows. You have a better view. So we don't belong to that climatic zone and neither to that kind of geography to do that. And a lot of times to say that, okay, for example, to have houses open from all sides, that itself is defeating the purpose of not having shared walls, hence exposing more walls to the external environment, which is causing the overheating of it. So basically, sir, if I'm right to put it, it's what is green, I would say climate friendly. It's about the cost of materials being used, what's the kind of energy they are using, and what's the energy which is going to be used while they are staying in the house. It's as simple as that. So I think if you have answers to both sides to it, then I think it's pretty much okay on that. And I would just like to say to the audience that we work with GVP, which is the Green Value Partner, and so we are collaborating with Ashok Lall sir as well. And if there is any developer who's keen to get his expert advice at the conception stage, I think that's what is most fruitful. We would be very happy to mediate and be a conduit to make it happen on that sense. So I think it's amazing, sir. And I think this is the fourth time I'm going through your presentation, but every time I get something new out of it as well. And I think it's pretty simple and very, very easy to implement. It's just a hesitancy which might be holding people back. So there are a couple of questions out there. So I thought I would ask them, a lot of them for Prashant. So I would be shooting them to you. It's saying is that as of today, the EDGE still uses ASHRAE standards in India, whereas in Indian market, the local bylaws are driven by NBCC, National Building Code of India, and Energy Conservation and Building Code. When do we expect to see the transformation of EDGE from American ASHRAE to standard to more indigenous standard?
I think it's a mistake, actually. It's maybe that's another rating system that uses ASHRAE. Right. We don't do that, actually. We take the local codes as much as possible, especially for housing. You know, the ASHRAE doesn't really apply, as far as I remember. The other thing is that actually we're going through a whole survey of adjusting the baseline. So we are even finding things like LED lighting and things like that has now become very ubiquitous in India particularly. So So we're adjusting it, including that in the baseline. So one has to go a little bit further, and that. I think we have made some progress, thanks to Ujala and other initiatives on the lighting front particularly. Maybe the next time I should have that as an example of India's success in terms of implementing that. But I think we are going through that whole search. We went through a whole extensive survey and tried to collect that data. And the next version, which is going to be launched soon, would have that. But I wouldn't worry too much about the baseline not being appropriate. I don't think it's anything like that just yet.
Mr. Lall, there's one question for you. So they're saying is, how can a low-rise structure be profitable in case the land cost is high, especially in metro cities?
Yeah, that's a conundrum. That's where the land cost is high. I would say it is a result of the policy that drives supply and demand balances. If you're talking about affordable housing, whether it is a local government, the city government, or the national government, they have to address the issue of land cost. If the land cost is high, in order to make back the money, you have to build 20 stories. You are not in the affordable range, my friend. You're simply not.
Yeah.
So this particular issue actually is calling for policy intervention to manage the land markets. What is being proposed in many development plans now, and I think the beginning has already been made, that a certain percentage of land that is being made urbanizable, say 30 to 40% of land, is being taken out of the speculative market range. So that, and this was the story of Singapore. How did Singapore manage to house 85% of all its population in housing board flats? How did they do it? They controlled land price. It couldn't have been done if it was in the open market. No way. So if you're really serious about affordability, and that's why I say, move to the medium town, to the small town. Don't think that you're going to make affordable housing profits in the big city.
If I may also chip in, actually. Sorry, just one other thing. I mean, 2 points there. I totally agree with that opinion, actually. I think what's happening in this, when we speak to our developers, that do projects in multiple cities, that gives you an idea of what is happening on the FSI. The general idea is that by increasing FSI, the government is encouraging more density, and therefore, making it more affordable. But what tends to happen is the reverse. The minute FSI increases from 2 to 5, let's say, in Bombay that's happening, right? The minute that happens, the landlord just hikes up the price. It doesn't, hikes up the price. And once the land value is more than 30% of the total cost, then it doesn't make sense for the developer to sell something very, cheaper, because the big cost is land. Then how could he even attempt at making something affordable? That's one. I think the solution, and it's not mine, and I heard this in one of the discussions, is not allow parking. Okay? The minute you don't allow parking in your apartment block, so let me give a bit of context. What's happening is that in places like Mumbai, people are increasing FSI around metro stations, around MRT, BRT in different cities. The justification is that now that we have got public transport, we can have higher density, which is the Singapore model as well, right? So that's the kind of idea. But what tends to happen is just the rich people move there, and they don't even use the metro, right? They just have 2 parking slots, and they're just there, and all you'll end up having is larger apartments. In fact, lowering of density instead of increasing of density, which is perverse in terms of what is necessarily happening. So I agree. I'm not suggesting I have the perfect solution, but this has to be looked carefully. Just a simple measure of increasing FSI is not benefiting developers, it's just benefiting the landlord. And one has to find a way, even if that's the way they want to do this, that one has to find a way of taxing the landlord enough to recover the money to pay for the affordability. There has to be some loop back as well. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Prashant, this is counterintuitive, but very interesting facet. Very, very interesting. So otherwise, it always looked like as if increasing FSI only means increasing supply. Hence, it means cheaper thing. Actually, it goes the other way around, because if the landlord knows that he can build more, he's going to charge more for the land.
So I'd like to come in to elaborate on that argument a little bit.
Yes, sir.
Monu.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The FSI solution is what I call an arithmetic solution. It is nothing but arithmetic, right?
Yeah. Yes.
The more you can build, the more houses you can have. But it hasn't looked at any other aspect of the impact of this arithmetic solution. All right. As how it affects the market is that the land values actually go up as you raise the FSI. Number one. Number two, the construction cost goes up. The time of construction goes up. The maintenance cost goes up. The operational cost goes up. Embodied energy goes up. Environmentally it is bad. Socially it is bad. So it is merely an arithmetic solution. So can we not modify the arithmetics by balancing it off with other important considerations? After all, this is housing. This is not selling potatoes, right? So I really do think this is a big, how shall I say, there's a blinker in this arithmetic approach of policy making for meeting supply and demand shortages. This has to be a much more holistic approach.
Right.
After all, as Prashant said so well, if you make the mistakes today, you are stuck with them for 80 years or 100 years.
Yep.
Right? So I think it's time now, as we are growing, to really think very carefully about our policy and the quality of housing that we are going to produce.
How materials such as AAC blocks and fly ash blocks save structure cost? Maybe they wanted to know how much.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you how much. The moment you go into reinforced concrete frame construction, which is normally required if you're building more than 2 stories high. So if you're building 3 stories, 4 stories, 6 stories, 8 stories, you're going to go into RCC frame. So the RCC frame has to carry the weight of the walls. And the amount of steel that goes into the beams, columns, and the foundations of the structure is proportionate to the weight of the walls. So even though fly ash, not fly ash, but AAC or even fly ash weighs less than burnt brick, weighs less than solid concrete block. AAC block is 20% less, 25% less in weight compared to burnt brick. When that weight comes down, the cost and the consumption of steel comes down. And you find that the overall cost of the structure has actually come down. And one of the other advantages of AAC block is that it gives you some insulation value. So on the outer face of the building, when you have AAC block, the heat transmission from the outside to the inside is reduced. Also because it is a smoother finish, what you have to spend on finishing, plastering and painting is also less. So overall, the cost is lower, it is more energy efficient, and therefore, for wherever you're going to RCC frame, think of AAC block or even fly ash block.
So one of panelists, sir, we have received feedback from developers suggesting the reliability of AAC block or fly ash bricks are not good. So any comments on that?
Yeah. We have used AAC blocks and fly ash blocks in several projects, okay? And we have absolutely no problem with it. Where people have complained about, cracks developing in the plaster and things like that, we've had to go back to find out where they procured their AAC blocks from, whether the blocks were properly made or not. And you often find that those blocks are under-cured, right? And that they are being put into the market too early. They actually shrink over time as they dry out. So if you buy a poor product because it is 5 rupees cheaper, okay, you're in for trouble. Go to a proper manufacturer, get technical advice and supervision from a proper manufacturer on how to do it. And I can tell you there's no problem whatsoever. We have used these in about 5-6 projects without a single complaint at all.
Okay. So does it also mean that when these new materials are coming on board, the standardization and the quality checks are just not there. Is that, we can say, an ecosystem that lacks in the non-conventional or the alternate materials which are there?
Yeah, that's part of the thing. That's part of the thing that in not every material is building standard certified, right?
Right.
So bricks are not building standard certified. AAC blocks are still not building standard certified, and so on. So I think until we get a certification system in place, and the market learns or the buyer learns that you have to go for the proper product rather than any old product, this problem is going to hang around. But as the market becomes wiser, as you have, made one mistake, it does not mean that the material itself is the wrong kind of material.
Right.
Because it is flourishing internationally, it is flourishing nationally.
Yeah.
You're right that the market has to become more sophisticated in terms of certifying the quality of the product.
It's been a great pleasure, and we hope the participants have got a good insight